webinar for you all. I'm not going to take much time. I will be introducing Sally. First of all, Sally Burberry is our trainer today. She's been teaching English as a second language for over 20 years. Sally is an experienced trainer for English assessment for Cambridge Assessment International Education. And this is not her first online training. She's an experienced online and face-to-face trainer. She's also an experienced examiner for English as second language from primary to IGCSEs. I would like to remind you all that this webinar is focusing on supporting you as teachers on the idea or the training for English as second language. We will not be discussing any grading or ranking issues. I would love to direct you to use the chat box for questions. Sally will be hopefully answering as many as she could. And at the end also we'll try and collect all of these and try and answer as much as possible. Please use the chat box. Your microphones are already muted. And I would like to thank you again for attending, and still the attendance number is growing. With no further ado, Sally, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Just starting my slides. There we are. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much. We have 101 attendees, so thank you so much for your time this afternoon. As Ahmed said, really the focus is to try and help you with your transition to online teaching, moving away from the classroom right now. So that is going to be the focus of our webinar this afternoon. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on IGCSE, English as a second language. And what I intend to cover with you this afternoon is really to think about all of the considerations when we move to teaching and learning online. So what we need to think about to get started. We're also going to explore how we can assess learners online, and also about learner engagement. I've had a few questions from you already about how to keep students engaged when we are teaching in an online format. So that is something we're going to cover. Actually, the engagement is going to be embedded in the other sections, but I've got a summary when we get to that stage as well, just so we're sure what good strategies we can use to keep our students engaged. And then we do have a small section about syllabus information. Again, I've had a few questions before the start of this webinar. So what I've tried to do is do like a frequently asked questions style to answer some of your questions. But of course, the real focus is on how we can do effective teaching and learning online. What I intend to do is just to pause at the end of each section, just to give you a bit of time to ask some questions, and I'll do my best to answer one or two of those during the webinar today. And any that are not answered, we'll have a look at those afterwards and try our best to get all of your questions answered. Okay, so just to start with, a little introduction. Online teaching and learning creates opportunities for new ways of effective learning and collaboration. So yes, at the beginning, it might seem a little bit daunting, a totally different environment in which we're going to be teaching and learning. But if we can think of this as a positive opportunity and really to think about how we can explore new and different ways of our good practice in the classroom, then this is a great start. Okay, so the first section, we're going to look at getting started, some different models that we can adapt in which to deliver our teaching and learning online, other considerations, And we're also going to look at some teaching and learning approaches. So let's get started. So first of all, we really need to think about some considerations before we begin our sessions. And the first thing, really what I think is, if we plan the lessons, the online lessons really well, then we're going to have a much more successful outcome. So I would say the first thing to think about is, are you going to choose to do synchronous lessons or asynchronous lessons? So what do I mean by that? So a synchronous lesson is when you invite all of your students at the same time as you to actually conduct the lesson in real time. So let's say, for example, that your lessons run normally for 45 minutes. So you can start maybe, let's say, 9 o'clock in the morning and have 45 minutes with your learners. So everybody's teaching and learning at the same time. Or an alternative model is to go for an asynchronous lesson. So an asynchronous lesson is when you, for example, record your lesson content and you share that with your learners, and they can then decide when they're going to access the lesson content and do the tasks that you've asked them to do. So this is the first decision. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to choose one and stick with that. You can do a combination of the two. And you might decide to experiment and just to see which is the best approach for your learners and yourself. And also it might be choosing different methods for different activities depending on what suits the task. So this is the first consideration. Now, the second one, it might seem really obvious, but really you've got to think about, where am I going to work? So normally we have our classroom environments in our school, and we have everything to hand, and it's our dedicated workspace. It's quiet, it's suitable for what we're doing. But working from home is quite different. We don't have the same sort of control over the environment potentially as we do in our classrooms. So we need to think about, where is going to be a space where I'm not interrupted, I'm not going to be distracted, and I can focus on what I'm doing. So as I said, that might sound really obvious, but it's a double thing. So this is important for us as teachers, but also it's very important for our students as well. And that is more challenging for them than it is for us potentially, because they may have a number of brothers and sisters all trying to do schoolwork from home. Their parents might be working from home. So there's going to be possibly a bit of competition for a suitable space to work, and also for equipment to use to access online learning as well. The next thing is to think about the length of the lessons. Now, obviously, it's a very different environment. When we're in our classrooms, we're all there together at the same time for the same period of time. So it depends whether you choose a synchronous or asynchronous lesson style to how this is going to affect your length of lessons. But the most important thing is that you try and match as closely as possible the hours they would normally have with you in the classroom, and match that online. And whether that is in whole lesson blocks, or whether you divide that down into smaller sections through the week, again, it really depends on the situation your students are in, and yourself, and what you think is going to suit the task best. The next one is really important. So what resources do my learners have access to? So I've already mentioned the challenge of finding a suitable space to work free from distractions. That's going to be much harder at home than it is in the classroom. And as I mentioned just before, there might be a lack of equipment in terms of a laptop or a computer or a tablet, simply because other people at home are also wanting to use them, or they may just not have those facilities at home. So what I would advise is to do a bit of research on this and find out for your class of students what their situation is at home. And if using a laptop or a tablet or something equivalent is going to be really difficult, then we always do this as teachers. We always need a plan B. So, this is just something to think about, but this is something you need to communicate with your learners about and find out what the situation is in each of your learners' homes. And this is something we do. The next point, opportunities for individual and group work. So we do this automatically in our classrooms, but I really just included this in this slide because I don't want us to forget about group work just because we are studying English as a second language online. So it might seem the most comfortable thing to give individuals work to complete in order to improve their skills. But also we have many opportunities to continue with pair work and group work. And this is something that we're going to explore a little bit later in the training this afternoon. The final point is to think about e-safety. So when we're using technology in our classrooms and the internet, then we always consider the safety, the e-safety of our students. And it is no different, in fact, even more important when we are conducting teaching and learning online. So probably the best thing to do is to think about your individual school's policy and follow the guidance here. So let's move on now to different models. So you could choose to do a whole lesson model. And this is in line with the synchronous lesson that I talked about earlier. So you might decide to have your learners with you for example, a whole 45 minutes and do an entire lesson from beginning to end. Another model that you could consider is to introduce and set the tasks. So you could do this in two ways. You can either have everybody as if you were going to do a whole class lesson. So everybody logs in and joins you at a certain time that you have communicated with them. And you can introduce the lesson and you can set the tasks. So it's important at this stage just to remember that we want to continue with our active learning style. So in a classroom, rather than just explaining the learning objectives and explaining the tasks that you want your learners to do, it's a much more effective way to actually elicit. So set a little task and elicit from the learners what they think the lesson is about, and also to be involved in understanding the task. So lots of questioning, lots of involving the learners. And this needs to continue when we do our online teaching. So you can have all of your learners together, introduce and set the tasks, and then it's almost like you have a break. So you maybe take your video off and let them have some time to complete what you've asked them to do. Now, this could be giving them half an hour and coming back at the end of the lesson just to consolidate and check people's understanding. Or it could be, I'm going to give you a couple of days and then we're going to come back and summarize and check and give feedback. And again, it really depends on the size of the task. So if it's more of a project, then you might give them a longer period of time. But if it's a fairly concise activity, you could give them, let's say, an hour, 45 minutes, and then reconvene at the end to summarize and to check. So you want to be doing some formative assessment at this point. The third idea is you could record a lesson, but in a number of stages. So it could be 3 or 4 stages. And you share those recordings with your learners, and they can access the lesson that you've pre-recorded, and they can follow your instructions and complete the tasks that you've asked them to do. And again, you need to just set them a time limit so that they can get the work done in a timely manner, and then you can think about how you're going to assess and how you're going to give feedback at the end. And with that third option, the recording option, it just gives learners a little bit more flexibility. So they've got their own time to complete. They know when the end deadline is, and they can continue with the tasks. Some students might decide that they want to just listen to the recording, watch the recording once, and that's okay. For other learners, they've got a real opportunity to work at their own pace and to maybe watch the video you're recording twice, 3 times until they've really got the information and they understand. So actually, learners can use this in quite a personalized way and to work at their own pace, possibly much more than they could in a classroom. And the final point here about different models is the flipped classroom. Some of you, I'm sure a lot of you, are familiar with the flipped classroom and have used it. It may be new to some people, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But it really does suit online teaching and learning. So we'll investigate that a little bit more further on. So other considerations, these are really key things. So we really do need to set clear goals. So the students need to know exactly what they're doing, what your expectations of them is, and that they really know what a successful piece of work looks like. So just like we do in the classroom, to share the success criteria, maybe to give them some modeling, maybe it could be a checklist, so that when they've done all of the things on this list, these are the things we expect them to do in that task. So these things are really important. Also, to set clear time limits. So I've talked a little bit about this already, but they need to know the time that they've got to complete the tasks. Possibly you could guide them and say, you should be spending about half an hour on this task, just so they know how in depth to go with the tasks. And crucially, they need to know the deadlines. So there will be a point where you want to collect all of the work in, and you might will think about different ways of assessing shortly. But they really do need to be clear on the deadlines and submit the work in a timely fashion, just as you would expect in a normal classroom environment. The third thing, which I think works really well with online teaching and learning, is to personalize the tasks. Now, I've got some examples of this in the next couple of slides. But one question I was asked before the webinar is, well, how do we know that the work is authentic? So if my student submits a piece of work, how do I know they've done it? How do I know they've not copied it from their friend? So yeah, this is it's a problem we face quite a lot. But if you personalize the tasks, it's unique to them. Now, don't worry, I'm not suggesting that you make a different lesson for each student, but it's more about them just taking a little bit of responsibility for maybe the topic or the context that they are developing the skills that you want them to do. So I've got some examples of that shortly. Now, I promised that we would look a little bit more about the flipped classroom. So very briefly, I'm going to just review what the flipped classroom is, just so everybody is clear. So the flipped classroom is when it's really one way of extending the classroom time. So you would choose a topic that you want to cover. So this will be something from the syllabus that you want to address. So this could be a piece of grammar, it could be a writing skill, a reading skill, really anything from the syllabus. But let's just say, for example, that you've decided to focus on punctuation. So what you could do is share a video link with your learners for them to access, and they are refreshing because I'm sure they will have done work on this area before. So to refresh their skills by watching the video. And it's also a really good idea to have some sort of quiz or something for them to check that they've caught the key points of the video clip that they watch. So it's like all of the students individually are doing a bit of refreshing on a skill from the syllabus. And then in the sort of class time, if you like, albeit online at the moment, this is the opportunity to really do a bit of group work, pair work, individual work to push that skill further and to put it into practice. So I think the situation that we're in at the moment, where we are delivering teaching and learning online, actually the flipped classroom really does give a fantastic opportunity to do this style of learning. So I would say if you've tried it before, don't stop using it now. I think it's very suitable for online teaching and learning. And if you haven't tried it, then maybe you could give this a go. So in the classroom time, the students come together and they can work individually and then as a pair and then maybe in small groups, really to develop that skill a little further. Okay, a little earlier, I mentioned personalized learning. So I promised that I'd give you a few examples, and here they are. So remember that when we're planning our lessons, everything should be driven by the syllabus. So we'll be choosing something from the syllabus that you know your learners need to practice and to improve. So my first examples could be prepositions. And I've decided to develop this skill of using prepositions that I've asked my learners to describe their favorite place. So when I said earlier about personalized learning, then each piece that you receive off your students could be totally different. And I think this is has a really strong link with motivation and engagement. Because rather than us as their teacher thinking, okay, I've got a good idea of my learner's interest, I'm going to choose this topic, they can really choose something that they're interested in, they've got experience of, and they can use that. So it's much more personal to develop the skills that we've asked them to do. Now, clearly, if we ask them to, this could be a writing piece, this could be sort of preparing for a speaking and listening activity. But clearly, if we ask learners to describe their favourite place, then prepositions is just one thing, but there's a whole host of other skills, like using adjectives to describe a wide range of vocabulary, etc. So clearly it's more than just prepositions. The second example could be, what's your favorite memory? So for example, if you decided that you want your learners to practice more with the past tense, this would be a fantastic topic, but it's an open topic. And again, the students can personalize the task to something that they are familiar with. And my final example is to describe a process. So this could be, I don't know, making an object. It could be they've got a particular hobby, or it could be something like cooking or baking. And the sort of skills that they would be practicing here are ordinals and sequencing. These are just three examples, three ideas, but I just wanted to give you some examples of how you can personalize, basing it on a skill from the syllabus, but making it a bit more personalized. Now, I was specifically asked how we can develop speaking and listening when we are delivering teaching and learning online. So I've just put together a few ideas here. So really, on the internet, we have so many different sound files and so many different video clips that we can access. We can carefully select these and share these with our learners. So we can use these sound files and video clips and use them as a source or like inspiration, if you will. So they can watch these video clips, they can listen to the sound files, and really it's providing an excellent model of English language. And then they can use that to maybe plan their own discussion or their own presentation. And this is where your students can equally work as an individual and do a presentation and accept questions at the end. Or it could be, a pair work, a sort of a dialogue, or it could be clearly a group discussion as well. So there are many opportunities here to develop speaking and listening skills. Now, this is particularly important because I don't know if you felt this. I do online teaching as well. And sometimes when you're working at home on your own, it can feel a little bit like you're a bit isolated because you're used to being in a school environment with lots of other teachers and support staff around. But now you find yourself on your own. Well, if we feel like that as teachers, then surely our learners do as well. So I think it's a complex thing teaching online. And for me, I would say 50% of how successful we can be is to be encouraging, to be positive, to be supportive, and to really build a community so that learners have got a wonderful opportunity to stay in contact with a purpose, but it could be just to discuss how they're feeling about learning online, uh, as well as discussing the actual subject information as well. So that for me is such a key element of successful online teaching and learning. Keep everybody together, connected, and try and avoid students feeling a little alone. Now, another wonderful opportunity for online teaching and learning is, if we're in our classrooms, imagine if we asked our students to record themselves and play it to themselves or to a friend, a peer in the class. It's something that many students feel really uncomfortable with. But actually, if they're working at home, they're in a room in their house, I think students will be much more comfortable doing this. So let's exploit this time. Let's really give students lots of opportunities to record themselves, listen back to themselves. And what a great opportunity, coming to my next point, to do some peer observation and peer feedback. So I think, there are some new opportunities here, which are more comfortable actually than asking them to do some of these things in the classroom. And finally, thinking about speaking and listening, they can prepare a presentation, record themselves, whatever the task is, and then finally they can send it to you. I would say with things like them chatting together in an online community, if there is a platform you can use where you can monitor that, all the better, because they might just go off target a little bit and you might want to steer them back. They might have done some great work, but you think they could go further. So you could pop in to the chat room or whatever platform they're using and just maybe ask them an open question to get them thinking more deeply about what they're doing. So that is the end of the general getting started section. So I'm just going to have a look at one or two questions just to see if we can answer just one or two quickly on this topic. Okay, I think the questions I can see at the moment are just general questions that are not specifically about this. If anyone does have any questions about that first section that I've not spotted there, then we've got an opportunity at the end. Okay, why can't I move my screen on? Right, I'm just going to reset this because I can't move my slide on. See, this is technology. We always have to have a plan B. Okay, yes, it's back. We're back. Okay, so the next section is about assessment. So, of course, there are many different ways of assessment, just the same as in the classroom, but we just got to find different ways to access this. So we'll have a look at this, and also clearly what follows on from assessment is giving feedback. And I also want to think about next steps from that. So, of course, just like in the classroom, we have all of these opportunities. Self-assessment, this needs to be guided by us. So I'm a really big fan of checklists. So I mentioned before about sharing the success criteria. So making a list of the key things that you expect your students to do to make a successful piece. Let's use writing an email as an example. So on your checklist, it might be write an introduction, cover the 3 bullet points, to write a conclusion, to write in a friendly, chatty style, to use paragraphs, to use punctuation. Don't make it too long, but these are some of the things that we would like to see in a successful email. So self-assessment, they can use the checklist, and you could have 2 columns, one that says, I have met this, and they can tick. Or the second option could be working towards this. And this really helps the students to understand what went well with that piece of work and what they could do more to improve further. We've talked about some opportunities for peer assessment. We've got teacher questioning, so to use lots of open questions. So this might be during a synchronous lesson, or it could be when you're monitoring students' discussions, maybe in a chat forum, for example. Teacher feedback. This is something we do in the classroom and something we need to try and continue when we are teaching and learning online. And potentially you could offer tutorial sessions. So this might be to book 5-10 minutes with each learner every couple of weeks, just to check in with them and make sure everything's going okay. But also it could be just, offering that to students who you feel really just need that extra bit of support. Again, flexible, you can use that as you feel fit. So self-assessment, I've talked about the assessment criteria, and I've talked about my idea of using a checklist. I think they are very effective. But also, when I'm delivering online training for English second language with teachers, uh, teachers are encouraged to keep a journal, and these are so effective. So if they're effective for us as teachers, then they are definitely effective for students as well. So a journal, if you divide it into 3 columns, the first bit is thinking about what you want them to do, let's say in a week, and to write down, what do I already know? What am I already confident with when I start this task? The middle column could be what I want to learn. And then the third column is like a summary at the end. So when all the tasks have been done, then the student can look back at what they wanted to learn and just reflect on what they have learned. And very importantly as well, what they would like to learn in addition, so that they can really consolidate their skills. Peer assessment, just like in the classroom, we need to set clear protocols. There's got to be a lot of mutual respect here. It's got to be very positive and constructive. And to model good ways of doing this is helpful as well. Again, just like with any assessment, they will need an assessment criteria. And finally, to have breakout groups is a fantastic idea when we are doing online learning. So a breakout group could be getting students to work as an individual to start with, or in pairs. So a bit like think, pair, share, when you get an individual to do a task, and then to get together with a peer to compare and share ideas. And then 2 pairs can join together to share more broadly. So if we can provide an area, it could be sort of a video conferencing platform. I don't know what is available in your different areas, but I know, for example, here in the UK, Zoom seems to be zooming. It's very, very popular. But whatever platform is available and works in your area, you can use video conferencing. So any way you can find to get students working together is wonderful. Teacher assessment. So we can do this continuously through formative assessment by asking open questions, getting students to think more deeply about what they're doing. And as I mentioned before, offering tutorial sessions might be appropriate, even if it's just for a few who need just that little bit of extra support. And of course, naturally, we move on, I'm aware of the time, move on to feedback. So you need to think about how. So am I going to give group feedback or individual? Am I going to give written feedback or verbal? So you just need to generally think about these things. For good time management, to think about the whole group and to identify some common errors is a really great way, because you're addressing something that everybody needs, but also they're learning from each other as well. So this could be video conferencing where, you've got this synchronous classroom going on. It could be in the form of a chat. It could be using the journals. All of these things are different ways you can give feedback. And this is what I would advise for the classroom as well, is to get the learners to identify their own errors with your guidance. So for example, let's go to my favorite email example. You might say, okay, in this piece, you have 5 spelling errors. Have you used paragraphs? And I'm not sure you've addressed all 3 bullet points. and leave it at that. So you're not going through, spending hours and hours showing them all of their errors, but they can, with your guidance, try and do some proofreading and then try and spot the errors, edit them, and redraft. So they're making improvements all the time. I would advise this in a classroom, but definitely with online teaching and learning as well. Make that a routine activity. It's really effective. And you could also divide feedback into smaller sections. So again, sticking with my email example, you might decide, okay, today I'm just going to focus on punctuation and give some feedback on this. Maybe the next lesson you could focus on content. The next lesson you could give feedback on grammar, maybe the range of grammar and accuracy of grammar. So you can break feedback down into smaller sections. This is a really key point. So when students have done the task, they have had some sort of assessment, they've got feedback, then this is where the journal really comes into play. Because if we can get learners reflecting on, okay, this and this and this, these were really successful. But actually, this and this, I totally forgot to consider these in my email. So these are things that I need to focus on next time. And they can also think about a bit of metacognition. How am I going to make these improvements next time? Thinking about maybe their individual learning styles. Okay, I'm going to have a look, see if I can find any questions. For some reason, I can't access the questions right now. So don't worry about that. At the end, I will have a look and make sure that I get some of your questions answered. Engagement. All of the things that I wanted to talk about with engagement are embedded in the first two sections. But here is a brief summary. So we really need to make sure that we set clear goals so that the students know what we want them to do and when we want them to do it. Consider personalizing tasks so you're covering the skills. However, you are giving them a little bit of freedom to choose exactly the context or the topic that they're going to achieve that in. This is a really key point as well. We need to be extra supportive when we are teaching online because we're not physically there with them. So we need to be really encouraging. We need to smile a lot. We need to be happy. We need to be positive, and really be supportive. And also, this last point here, to be in regular contact. We need to be sensible about this. We're not available 24/7, but if you can keep a communication line open with your students, this will really reassure some students. If they're struggling, they could perhaps send you an email or a message and just ask for a little bit of support. You can do some regular checking with your students just to make sure they're feeling okay about what you've asked them to do. Okay, I don't know why. Oh, here we go. I can access questions. Okay. Okay, so there's an interesting question here. What is the appropriate age group for online classes according to Cambridge? Well, of course, this is my opinion as an individual trainer. I can't speak on behalf of Cambridge exactly, but I would say it's suitable for any age. As long as we're choosing the right level of material, making sure that everything is easy to access, thinking about video clips, for example, as long as it's age appropriate and appropriate to the content of the syllabus, it's actually suitable for most levels and most ages, I would say. Okay, so I'm not going to ignore the other questions, but because we're really running out of time, I'll have a better look at those afterwards and get some answers to you. Of course, it's frozen again. Let me just restart it. There we go. Back. So very quickly, we're about out of time. So I'm going to just, you're going to get these slides. I was asked before the start of the webinar to talk about how to boost vocabulary, some questions about the report and the review and listening. So just very, very quickly, I've made a list of some of the key elements that we need to think about when we are addressing vocabulary and trying to build vocabulary. So I've made a list here. So what I would suggest, because time is so short today, I wish we had a little more time, have a look at that after the webinar. And if you've got any questions at all, I'm happy to answer those. But for me, these are some of the key things that we can help our learners to do to boost their vocabulary. On here, I've taught, the last thing on here is to learn word groups. So one thing that I found really helpful for learners is to think about words in groups. So clearly the first three boxes here, tiny, medium, enormous, is all about size, but then they can brainstorm some synonyms for each of those word groups. So they're just expanding and expanding their vocabulary all of the time. Very quickly, the report and the review. I know this is new, and everybody's doing a lot of great work to understand these new tasks. All I can say is that in face-to-face training, I am asked lots of very, very detailed questions, and I would advise that actually it's, as long as you've got the general content there, we're not looking for a very prescribed format or layout. So you can relax a little on exactly what should be in each section. But as a guide, thinking about the report, first of all, the report is either going to be about an event, for example, a concert or a trip. You can see on this school support hub, there's an example of a trip report on there. Or it's a report about a place, for example, a restaurant or a museum. So if we think about the email, it has to be friendly and chatty. What we would like to see for the last activity, whether that's an article, report or review, is that it should be semi-formal or at least more formal than the email. That's what we're looking for, a difference in register, something a little more formal. Students or candidates are free to use headings to label each section of the report, but again, it's not a requirement, but they are free to use them if they wish. These are some of the things we're looking for. In the introduction, we would like to be clear what the aim of the report is. So is it to improve the trip for next time? So what is the report purpose? And also a little overview of the content, what is going to be in the report. The main part should have details of the situation. And if they can put in their positives and negatives, that will help the final section where they've got to make recommendations. So it might be recommendations of things which work well, but also recommendations for things that should change next time or should change about the event or the place. Very quickly, the review, very, very similar, but a review. One thing I noticed as an examiner last time, a lot of students were thinking about this task hypothetically, like they were going to go on a school trip or they were going to review a course which has not happened yet. So as long as they are clear that they are doing a report or a review on something which has already happened, this is a good tip because this is something students didn't get quite right last time. So again, clear information about what is being reviewed. Very important for candidates to give their clear opinions and interesting points about the topic. And then very, very importantly, at the end, they need to give their opinion. So the one that I marked last time was about reviewing a course that they'd been on. And it was like a singing and dancing course. So they could give their opinion, and would they actually recommend other students going on the course or not? So that last section is really important to make it into a review. So I know that's really quick, but these are some of the things that I'm frequently asked. So I just wanted to share those with you this afternoon. Listening, we're out of time really. So I'm going to give you, you're going to get these slides. So I would just give yourself some time to have a look through this. These are some of the key points from looking at the syllabus, and also from my point of view as an examiner, of some of the key things that students need to focus on. I just want to finally remind everybody of all of the wonderful resources that are on the School Support Hub. So do continue using this. There is further information about how to teach your subject online, but all of the regular documents are on there as well. So, you know, please don't forget about this resource. Also, if you've got very specific questions about the syllabus, and it could be that you've got more questions about the report and the review, this middle one here, the School Support Hub, on there we have something called Community. And here it's a bit like an email. So you can see all of the questions that teachers have asked previously. So you might have your question answered already on there. Or you can post a question and somebody, a subject expert in Cambridge, will get back to you to answer your question. So this is a really great way to keep in contact in these unusual times, let's call it that. Okay, so yeah, so please do keep having a look at the website. Lots of great resources on there. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I'm just going to quickly have a look. Okay, again, I can't see anything very particular there. So rest assured, I'll have, yeah.
Hello. Yeah, can you hear me well?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so we had a few questions. I don't know why you can't see the chat box, but anyhow, one of the questions was, how can we include them or motivate passive students who do not actively participate during the Zoom sessions?
Okay, so if you're using a Zoom session, I'm guessing that this is a whole class activity. So I think a lot of the skills that we use in the classroom are transferable here. So you can use targeted questioning. So if you can see that this is always the case, whether we're online or in a classroom, I call them like hidden students. So it's all about asking questions that are accessible to students, really to draw them in. So that's what I would say, to transfer those skills that we use in the classroom to online training, especially if we're in a Zoom session. You can really access those quiet students, as long as we're choosing something which is, you know, something that they can feel success with. We're not asking them a really tricky question.
Okay, we'll take one more question. What are different types of flipped classrooms?
Okay, so I think different teachers use it in slightly different ways, but I think the fundamental approach to the flipped classroom is, as I said, to use a video clip, something which is suitable for the target language that you're wanting to cover. So this could be, it could be a grammar tense or a piece of punctuation, whatever the target language is. Get them to look at this video and to refresh their knowledge of this element of the syllabus. try and incorporate some sort of checking, give them a quiz. I don't know if participants have used Kahoot before, but this is where you can set a couple of quiz questions and each individual learner can answer. So you can do a bit of formative assessment to check they've understood the key elements,
Yeah.
and then move on to group work as you would normally.
Yeah. Well, we are 5 minutes away from the end, so I would like to say also that we've provided a few free resources for this specific time, Sally, and one of these resources is the Resource Plus. So all teachers around the world can go to the generic website, the public website, CambridgeInternational.org, and can check the Resource Plus, where they can actually use this tool to create questions and create even a certain weight of question papers that they need to spread to their students. So it's also another way of supporting the learners. Now I'm going to put a link for all of you, my dear colleagues, where you can fill it and we can have your contact details, because we will be supporting more of subject-specific groups as well. So it would be on the generic website, on the public website, and also to send directly to the teachers. So I've just posted the link on the chat side. I've shortened it, to be honest. It's much longer, but I made it very short. So you can click it and you can just fill the information there, your name, your school,